Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Reckoning of Roku chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 29, which is called Local Element. Once again, YouTube channel membership is enabled if you want to help support the channel, and subscribing also helps. So what we have here is a pretty important chapter in the book where we basically get the setup for sort of what the finale in a way is going to be from a pretty early point in the book. But most of this chapter is Roku kind of discovering more information about the clan. He really gets a good sense for what life on the island is like, and it really begins to sort of alter the way he kind of views things and kind of changes his perception on things, because it is an island that is not necessarily part of one of the four nations, and it by itself, in a way, forces him to view it differently than he would view anything else. Getting into that idea of being a spirit of no nation, he can't, after experiencing kind of being here for a while, he can't view this as just another fire island. This is its own unique thing, and it's fascinating to see what he kind of learns just from being here for a few days, even if he has suspicions about Ulo, as we will get to. So Roku wakes up. He's finally well enough to get up and look around and like basically be introduced to the village. And basically what we get here at the start is him seeing all of the villagers kind of doing all the work. They have rice paddies, getting the crops and stuff like that, and just the amount of work that goes into letting this clan survive. And he compares it to the idea that his family owned many rice fields throughout the archipelago. And when they were younger, their father would bring the boys out to kind of survey the workers. It's good to let them see you, so they don't get lazy. And he almost didn't really think much of it back in those days, but there's such a contrast between then and now, where he can so clearly see the effort, the strain that goes into making this stuff happen. And you can see that Roku already has evolved, has grown as a person, and we're going to see him learn a lot from this island in this chapter, of course. So he notices stuff like the metal that a lot of their stuff is made out of has the kind of red sheen to it. It's the special metal. And when he asks about it, he just gets the response from Ulo. What alloy is this? Local elements. That's the title drop, basically. And Ulo, of course, describes the whole thing of like, we're very proud of the way we kind of are able to survive on our own, self-sufficient. The island provides, we protect it, and we never take more than what we need, of course. He asks a few questions like, is that the way to the sacred cave? And he gets confirmation on that. He asks about the earthbenders that are missing. And he's aware that Ulo kind of gives him a bit of a fake answer here, saying that, oh, it's this infestation of tree bark. But he knows there's more to it there. Kind of Ulo's lying about something or other here. He then asks like a more kind of personal question of like, when you go into the sacred cave, does everyone leave feeling as drained as I did? And so Ulo goes into some depth on this in terms of being like, no, not those with proper training. And he explains that like the kids that grow up on this island who are benders are trained from a very early age to master these breathing and meditation exercises, to get them used to sort of kind of controlling their inner energy. And then they're slowly introduced to the cave to get a sense of the power, and spending longer and longer in there until they eventually are able to use the power, full power, for as long as they basically need to, kind of safely. He says, as you know, sending a bender in without that training is like dropping someone who does not know how to swim into the middle of the sea. And there's a few kind of interesting comparisons here of like, one, the tragedy from Roku's past that kind of relates to that, but the way Roku kind of feels that analogy very strongly with the idea of that's how he felt when he was announced as the Avatar, thrown into the deep end out of nowhere, basically, as well. And it's the same for any bender going from this power level to sacred cave power level. It's an interesting comparison. So then we get the idea of, he asked the question, can you basically take that energy from inside and sort of still be empowered outside of the cave when you return above ground? Ulo says no. The power is not ours to claim. Just as the first of our kind relinquished their bending to the lion turtles after returning from the spirit wilds, so must we leave ours in the cave. We make offerings each equinox so that Yung Gip may continue to allow us to borrow it. Any misuse would invite the cave spirit's wrath. So that's an interesting one just by itself, because to me, Ulo, knowing that information that goes all the way back to like Juan's time, is probably the thing that most heavily highlights that when we're talking about the history of this island, this clan, that's probably the thing that actually clarifies most heavily that there probably is, just to a certain degree, an unbroken kind of lineage that does go all the way back to roughly the time of Juan, to the point where like knowledge of that kind of old stuff still exists to that day. Because we're talking about 10,000 years ago, that information, and that one of the only kind of clans that really also would know that information is like the Bonte tribe, which is also a kind of isolated Fire Island type situation. And then of course you have like the Sun Warriors as being another one as well. So that's why like I don't really have an issue with Ulo saying that, because there's definitely a bit of a suggestion that the chiefs of the Lombok clan, to a certain degree, have passed down this knowledge as a story the whole time through, so that they would probably kind of know that overall. The bigger question probably is like, there's no real reaction from Roku to hearing this information, to where you might have a bit of a reaction to that. But at the same time, I'm not sure how well we necessarily know the idea of like how much do people really know about like where humans got bending from. Like there's obviously the whole, bending animals type situation, but then this side of the story here, like where does the literal power come from? What do most people know about lion turtles is an interesting one. But I would definitely lean towards interpreting this as like a view to how old the clan truly is, that it's not just a couple hundred years, it probably is going back quite a few thousand years ago, ultimately. So, we move on from here, and Roku begins to kind of think about kind of Ulo, because like, okay, I've asked a few too many questions here, so I'll just keep myself to myself here. So he's thinking to himself the idea of, what's going on here? Like, have Ulo's people, found the Earthbenders? Is that maybe what's going on here? He's clearly directing our conversations away from certain things, and he's very careful when he does that. And we get Roku's kind of full opinion on Ulo here, that on one hand, on the positive side of things, he is a good leader. He has led this clan for a long time, and they've kept themselves hidden, strong, and functional, and especially from a mixed community of non-benders and benders of all four elements. That's super impressive, because that, as far as Roku's aware, hasn't really been done in history. He's never heard anything about that. And under Ulo's leadership, things are working here overall. And he thinks the Fire Nation could use more level-headed, competent leaders like him. But on the other side of things, he doesn't trust Ulo completely. He guides their conversations carefully. The scorn in his words when he talks about outsiders, and how he tries a little bit too hard to be calm all the time. He's very forced in that way, as if he's holding back a something overall. And Roku's aware that there is something he probably does need to figure out. And so, scene cut, that night, Roku decides to go into the sacred cave on his own. Ulo finally gets away from him, and Roku does at nighttime walk into the sacred cave. And his attention is immediately caught by the black markings on the walls of the cave, which are the stories of the history of the clan, basically. And there's an interesting comparison point here of like, like the history depicted on the walls is sort of similar to how in the Royal Gallery in the Fire Nation, the history is sort of on the walls there. The Fire Lord portraits, but also, Fire Nation history, as well as they used to have Fire Avatar portraits, and they note here in the text they had all been destroyed by the false avatar and were never replaced. So reference to Shadow of Kyoshi there, which is kind of nice. Makes sense to come up in this context. But we get Roku interpreting these drawings. So we get the sort of story as it's written here, and it is basically the origin of the Lombok clan to a certain degree. Again, is it true, or is this there to lean into the idea that Ulo is lying about a lot of this? Because again, we got the idea Ulo's touching up these drawings, so there's almost the idea of like, how old actually are they? Is he just like, you know, retracing over everything, or is he just making these up himself? There's a big kind of question here about some of this stuff. But yeah, basically what's depicted on the walls is the idea of different parts of the island, effectively. Oh, sorry, I've skipped ahead a little bit, actually. First of all, firebenders settling on the island. It's followed shortly by non-benders, and then benders of other elements also arriving, highlighting the mixed kind of nature of this community. Then, for whatever reason, the people split into 5 different clans that live on different parts of the island. Then we have kind of 4 disasters effectively happening, and the idea is one of these clans, one part of the island, is destroyed by fire, one destroyed by earth, one destroyed by water, one destroyed by wind, with the idea being that apparently each of the 4 nations at some point finds this island and wipes out one of the clans on this island, leaving, in a way conveniently, the Lombok clan as being the last of the kind of original clans on this island. And Roku immediately is skeptical. Of course, it's a little bit too convenient here for what the islanders want, which is, we're suspicious of outsiders, so of course the stories here make all the other nations look terrible. But Roku knows the other nations, even historically, and the idea is, okay, I get it. The Earth Kingdom absolutely could have done this. The Fire Nation, even though he's from the Fire Nation, he thinks in his head, yeah, they probably could have done something like that. But he really does not think the Water Tribes and the Air Nomads would be capable of doing something like that. And then especially, of course, the Air Nomads, the idea of what on earth situation could that possibly happen in? The Air Nomads wiping out a clan. That doesn't line up with anything that we know. So that seems particularly made up overall, really speaking to how much of a lie it probably actually is. But it gets Roku thinking about the idea that this is a depiction of sort of conflict, destruction, sort of forming and altering kind of boundaries and what is viewed as being like the who's in control of each section and stuff like that. And he thinks about like the formation of the 4 nations, and that clearly that, you know, this tribe has this history that's basically predates the 4 nations, but that he'd always basically considered that in history, it's always been thought that the 4 nations and what their boundaries are have almost been inevitable since the beginning of time. But then he thinks like, oh wait, oh yeah, maybe what Sister Disha was saying about like illusory boundaries and that, like, you know, the politics of this sort of thing, the nations trying to expand and stuff like that, maybe it doesn't mean as much, because it is just all about the conflicts making these things actually happen, and how there's that, and then there's the history of this clan, and it's an interesting kind of comparison point overall. And it says here, yeah, despite all the schooling, nobody had asked Roku to consider too deeply the consequences of those conflicts and the perspectives of those who saw another way the world could be overall. And yeah, he considers what Sister Disha said, he considered what Gyatso said to him, kind of calling the Fire Nation, Roku's clan, like an oppressor. And it's forcing Roku to consider things very differently, kind of through the lens of this isolated clan here, the Lombok clan. And yeah, he points out that, really, like, is this actually the only one of the 5 original clans? Like, were they this? Is this actually the case? Like, he doesn't know what to really make of it overall. But anyway, the next section of the story is this. So we get an army of earthbenders attacking the Lombok clan. And it's brutal the way it's described here. Severed limbs, crushed skulls, women, children, men, all being killed. And then he doesn't know what to make of it, but the idea seems to be that the people retreat into the caves. And then the idea is that in a big cave they kind of counterattack, and then they massacre the invading earthbenders using all of the elements. They flip the script completely, but he doesn't know what to make of it entirely. And this is when Ulo arrives. So Ulo has found Roku and explains that this part of the story is the awakening of Yung Gip. This is the story of like the singular most important event in the history of the island, which is, and he tells it, and he goes full storyteller mode here, telling Roku the story here, that yes, the people were attacked by the earthbenders. They retreated into the tunnels. Long ago used to be a lake of lava, eventually finding their way to effectively the sacred cave before they knew it was a sacred cave properly. And the day that this event happened to happen is the autumnal equinox. And so, yeah, the sun reached the highest point in the sky. The space was filled with energy, and the benders used this energy to fight back and wipe out the invaders. And this is how it happened. But then we get the whole spirit aspect of this, which is that apparently in the aftermath of this, the clan began to sort of praise, worship the cave spirit, Yung Gip, who granted them this strength and was basically asked the question of, will you let us keep a fraction of your energy within this cave so that we can protect you, the cave, the island from outsiders, and in exchange, like, we'll worship you, and we will prove our dedication to you by doing a ritual every equinox to kind of earn this energy as like the savior of our clan. So that's the basic story of what's going on here, which is interesting, but Roku's interpretation of this is immediately like, not sure about that either, because it's a good story. It makes a lot of sense, but when you start to question it, it kind of maybe doesn't work out so well, because do spirits work like that? Do spirits ever really want praise or kind of worship like that? Not in what Roku has read, and us as the audience, not what we've read ever really. That for the most part, spirits don't even like to interact that much with humans and make deals and stuff like that. And the few times we've seen it happen in the past, of course, it has kind of tended to cause problems and stuff like that. Or they're usually sort of like dark deals to a certain degree. So this almost quite reasonable deal doesn't seem like something that could actually happen here. So, you know, Roku's questioning this for sure overall. And then he starts to ask the big questions about the Lombok clan itself. It was like, what's going on here? Perhaps it was not the four nations that had destroyed the other clans, but the Lombok themselves, who were then free to craft stories of their heroic survival. Perhaps there had only ever been a single clan, and the narrative had been created to stoke the people's fear of outsiders. And it's like, the book is directly telling you to almost interpret it that way. But what is the truth? It probably is the case that maybe there was maybe one or maybe two incidents maybe where something happened and there was conflict, and that was maybe used and expanded out into something or other. But the full extent of it definitely doesn't seem to work out as nicely as the story kind of tells. Ulo goes on to explain the idea of like the sort of progression then of like the clan then learned to harness the power that they were given. And so yeah, the waterbenders cast fog each day to keep us concealed from passing ships. The earthbenders shift the coastlines each season to make our shores unchartable to those curious enough to approach. Our firebenders forge weapons to defend against those dangerous enough to venture inland. And Roku asks, and the airbenders are as flexible as the air nomads in the ways they serve our clan. But we have never used this power for any purpose other than to keep the island and Yung Gip, the cave spirits, safe. So Roku is kind of like, okay, that makes sense. But again, he goes back to the idea of Ulo is clearly altering the history of this clan to, you know, make good use of it, basically. But he is also this good leader that has led this clan to survive all of this time by, you know, utilizing the skills of all four benders of all four elements plus non-benders to create this to a certain extent, utopian kind of fantasy environment, almost. He says, Roku thinks to himself, the world could learn from this. Like, I could learn from this. And he thinks, like, as the Avatar, that, like, I'm meant to, like, maintain balance. And I think that means more than just being a kind of political figure trying to negotiate between, like, four kind of political groups, basically the nations, and, you know, punish people. I think it has to be more than that. And maybe with this island, he's beginning to really see the idea of what he can do as the Avatar by seeing things a bit differently. And he's thinking that this mission is a bit more complicated now. Like, I'm going to have to do more than just get the Earthbenders to leave. Afterwards, I think I have to kind of advocate and negotiate with Fire Lord Taiso about making sure this clan remains independent from the Fire Nation. He feels that that has to be the case, even though he knows Taiso probably won't like that because of the whole Outer Island Rebellion thing, and this is an outer island, basically. So he's going to have to do that, and then he thinks, like, the Sacred Cave is going to be a problem. If the Earthbenders get it, have to keep that away from that. The Fire Nation shouldn't have it, but also, he wasn't even certain the native clan itself should have it. So that's an interesting one that he's even going, like, thinking that much about it. So I like the sudden, like, okay, here's Roku properly thinking about things, like, as the Avatar. He's really beginning to become a spirit of no nation, viewing this not just from the perspective as a Fire National. I think we're kind of seeing that already. But the final part of this chapter is an interesting offer from Ulo. So Ulo explains that, oh yeah, we commemorate the awakening of Yung Gip every equinox. That's coming up in the next couple of days. We have all these celebrations to mark this occasion. But one of the big things that happens is that me, as the chief, I go into the cave to perform the ritual. And it's only meant to be me. But I think Yung Gip brought you, the Avatar, to us for some sort of a reason. So I want you to come with me the day after tomorrow, when it happens, to meet Yung Gip, and we'll find out what that reason is together. And Roku's like, okay, I guess I'm stepping up here. I have to do some human spirit dynamic stuff here, interact with a spirit. And she's like, it will be an honor. And he's going to go ahead with it. And he's going to get this, like, almost random opportunity to do something quite impressive as the Avatar, and he kind of really feels like he's kind of onto something here, but he also feels there is still an ulterior motive with Ulo, and so is sort of cautious about this, of, like, he has very carefully directed the conversation away from anything that maybe might lead Roku to being suspicious, but now he's suddenly asking me to join in on their big ritual that's, like, at the heart of everything. That's a big shift. So what's going on here? So this is the kind of ending sequence that we're setting up, is that, so in, like, what, the day after tomorrow, this is going to happen, and what incidents are going to happen on the island surrounding the equinox is the big setup. But yeah, important chapter, I think, very interesting chapter the whole way through, with getting some ideas on the history of the clan. Roku very much developing as a character, but you also see that he's being drawn in by Ulo in some ways, but is also very aware of the lies himself when it comes to Ulo. So I really like the dynamic here, where he really appreciates what this island is, but there is a bigger picture as well to all of this. It's a fascinating position Roku is put into, and I think there's just a lot of fun details throughout the chapter as well, like Ulo referencing kind of like line turtles and, like, the origin of humans having bending. And I think you getting a proper sense for, like, yeah, you're really meant to consider this as being a very old clan. So definitely in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this interesting chapter. But otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.